Okay, this might be a first for me in that I started crying before we even hit record to do the introduction for today's guest. I'm going to give you the official intro, and then I'm going to give you the Alex intro of my friend, Ashley Larkin, who is going to talk to us today a little bit about her most recent journey of going back to school. She has been trained as a journalist. She's a beautiful writer. She has worked as a full-time youth mentor, a freelance writer, a conference speaker, and a women's pastor at her church. And she just graduated, like freshly graduated, with a master's degree in counseling from Western Seminary. This is Ashley Larkin, mom to 3 teen and young adult daughters, and married to Mike for 27 years. She has been married to Mike for 27 years. I think I have known Ashley for 26 years because we met right after we all got married. 2 couples, not just all 4 of us together, but Ashley and Mike and Derek and I got married. We met at church in Portland. And there are so many things I could say about Ashley, but I will say I remember the honor she asked me to write a letter of recommendation for her master's program to be a counselor. And I remember saying, I cannot think of a better person to sit in a counseling room. She is the most empathetic, the most wise woman. And I even wrote about Ashley's face in one of my books about the expressive feedback she gives when she is listening to somebody. And how one time we were talking about, it's been a lot of years that we've been looking at each other's faces and they've changed over the years. And Ashley said, I just see my wrinkles as evidence that I've used my face. And Ashley has used her face to cry with me. I mean, it's like looking in a mirror. If I smile, she's smiling back at me. If I'm crying, she's crying right there with me. Finally, I'm going to say finally, because her whole life has been trajecting towards this, is now going to start her counseling practice in the fall. And I'm so excited for her. But what we're going to be talking about today is this lifetime journey that has led her to where she is now. And that sometimes there are a lot of other things that have to happen in life before you get to that thing that you're going to do, or maybe you discover along the way that you would like to do. So that is my introduction. So here we are. Welcome, Ashley, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It is a joy and an honor to be here. And thank you for your words, Alex. I love you, Krista. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just jump in with the big change that we talked about.
Yes.
You went back to school.
I did.
At the same time that your kids were going away
Yes.
to school. So talk to us about that, because I think a lot of our listeners are at a point in their career where they're thinking, one, I may be re-entering the workforce, which we've talked about before on the podcast, but also I might be wanting to make a big change that involves more education. So tell us your story. Talk to us about your process.
Yes. So about 4.5 years ago, it became clear that some of the places that the Lord was inviting me into were going to require further education. I've been now a women's pastor at our church for the last 6.5 years. At that time was walking with many women and finding again and again that trauma was a huge factor, as it is for many people in their stories, and that the work that I wanted to do, I needed further training for, to be able to really walk with women who had experienced abuse and various forms of trauma, that I was going to need to go to school for that. Around the same time, like all of us, we were in the middle of COVID, seeing some of the impacts on the mental health of adolescents specifically. That was what was right up close and personal for me, as my girls were those ages. And I've always loved teenagers. I just delight in teenagers. And so I remember hearing at one point, what is something you can do that is uniquely a fit based on your wiring and your heart? And so working with teens who are struggling with their mental health was another call for me during that time. So as we considered me going back to school, I did consider things like getting an MDiv, becoming a spiritual director. But as I continue to peel back the layers, what I most wanted was to walk with people through some of their hardest places, being able to really look at all of the factors such as trauma and the deeper stories that people are bringing to life so that they can walk in ongoing and maybe for the first time hope and wholeness. So that is what led me to Western. I'll be honest and say once I decided, it was just like all guns a blazing. I can be fairly decisive when it's time. And once I knew it was time, I think I sent out my application within a week and a half. It was just like, yes. I had the support of my family and friends. Mike and I prayed a lot about it. And that for me has been a huge part of this whole process. You two are a part of that. Other people who are a part of reflecting back to me who they see me to be. And that has really helped me step into places where I didn't yet have the confidence, but I could borrow a little bit of their confidence in me. And
I am so for borrowing confidence. I've been really camped in this idea lately of how do we borrow hope? How do we borrow that from the people around us? Because God designed us to be in community.
exactly.
And sometimes we don't have it for ourselves, but we can borrow it from the people around us. And we should be doing that for each other. When there's a battle going and Moses is up on the hill and Aaron and Hur are holding his arms up. And I mean, that is the biblical picture of community. And so I love that you say that sometimes we need to borrow confidence or belief from other people around us to step into this new calling, and it will fit eventually. But maybe the armor is just a little too big, but we're going to grow into it.
That's
And
exactly.
so as you stepped out into this place of going back to school after being away from school for a long time, how did you develop the confidence to do that? Because it can feel overwhelming when we've been out of that realm.
Absolutely. I hadn't been in school for, I think at that point, 25 years. And it was incredibly vulnerable for me to walk from a space where I felt like I was not a pure expert, but a relative like expert in my field, knew generally what I was doing. And I was continually confronted with the fact that I was a learner. And I remember coming home from school and just saying, like, literally, my brain hurts. It was things were being rewired. I was having to concentrate in ways I hadn't. And so there was a lot of doubt for me, I think, in those initial years. I was also, when I started school, my dad had just passed 4 months earlier. So I realize now what a state of grief I was still in. So thinking clearly would have been difficult anyway. But I will say part of the growing in confidence was needing to give myself permission to learn. And I have said that it was my mantra during that time that I don't know this because I haven't learned this yet. And so being able to step into learning as well as over time recognizing the gifts of wisdom that we bring to the work that we do, that's not something that can be manufactured or fabricated or even taught necessarily in a program. But as much as I learned from the 20 somethings and the 30 somethings in my program, they were learning from the 40, 50, 60 somethings in our program. And so we really made each other better in that. So really being able to embrace that that was true was a super big step for me in moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's probably transferable to lots of new places where women step in and realize I'm on the continuum of lived experience here
That's
in
right.
this room. And the goal, the hope, I think, is that we are in spaces where there are people older than us or more experienced than us, and then people that we are journeying with, or maybe that we're mentoring a little bit. I'm curious, as you went back,
Mhm.
you were working still, right?
Yes.
How did that impact just your day-to-day operating, your family life? What kinds
Mhm.
of questions were you asking yourself and talking to Mike about as
Yeah.
far as mom's going back to school, and this is a whole nother layer of time, energy, responsibility that we're going to have to look at together as a family.
That's right. Yeah, when we made the decision, it really was a family decision. The girls were 13, 16, and 19 at that time, various places in school and with relation to the pandemic as well. And so we were all kind of like coming out from a hole in the ground. Like, what is life now? What am I doing? Where are we going? It was pretty disorienting. I would say for me, I felt the support of our girls and Mike immediately. So the struggles that I had to receive their help were really more mine. I'm much more comfortable in the caregiving role than on the receiving end of care. And so there were multiple times early on in the program where I just felt like it was too costly. And so I remember saying many times, like, I don't know if I can do this. I felt so deeply uncomfortable not being able to function in the ways that I always had as a mom. I will say the time I went back was a good time for me because the girls were beginning to venture out on their own, develop their own independence and stronger sense of self and all of those things. But good, bad, right, wrong. I mean, for the last 4 years, I've been mom on the couch with her readers on, in the middle of the house with all of the things going on just so I could be interruptible. It probably didn't make me the most efficient, but that was part of the decision I wanted to make, not to shut
Mm.
myself away, not to be a little academic in a, dark room, but to be a part of my family's life. And when the girls would have friends walk in the door, put my book down and hear. So it has been complicated and messy, but it's been an ongoing process of figuring that out together and being really honest in our communication with each other.
I think it's beautiful that you were right in the middle of the living room because then they see you doing it. They see you doing the work. They see you growing. They see you stepping in with courage to a new place in your life. And that inspires them.
Mm.
And so I think it's great you were in the middle with your readers on. I just love that picture of you right there. And like you said, it's messy. And I think that's part of the journey for all of us, that we have to accept that it's not going to be tied up neatly into this little box and everything time wise is going to fit just so. And no, it's going to look like a hot mess a
That's
lot of
right.
the time. How did you journey through that and come to accept that?
Yeah. I think there were I listened to the podcast recently with Tammy and Kristen. Tammy was talking about some of the things that she had to release, cleanliness of her house, or for us, maybe having events the way we might want to, or the way I would envision. Some of it is very small sorts of changes like that. But some of what was happening was my identity was being shaped. My identity is always in Christ, but there were certain parts of that being refined, certain things that were coming to light for me in my own program. So I think, again, seeing myself as a learner, also as a person in process, and that if I truly believe that God has led me to this place and that it's for the good of his people, that includes my kids. So there are ways that he is going to be teaching them, that he is going to be using this experience for their benefit. So yeah, I think knowing that was helpful to me. This last 4 years, I've leaned on community more than I ever have in my life. And as you said, that's what we're here for. And if I feel capable, I'm less likely to lean on other people than if I'm feeling my frayed edges. So that has been ultimately such a gift. But seeing weakness as a gift is a process for all of us. That certainly has been for me.
I think you've had some unique pathways that have helped inform this is the direction I want to go, as far as things you've been drawn to for work and also for volunteering, and places where you've thrived and received feedback where people have said, like me, you're really good at listening to me. You're really good at helping me sort through these things. How did church ministry specifically
Mhm.
influence you? And I think for a lot of our listeners, maybe some of the leadership that they've experienced over the last 10 or 20 years, if they've been out of the workplace, has been within a church context or
Yes.
maybe a community context like school, PTA, that kind of thing. How did that uniquely prepare you as you were considering your next steps?
Yeah, I love that question. And that was very true for me. That, my involvement with being in the girls' classrooms and being a part of their school's leadership, volunteering there, and also the places I was invested in the church, I think it did several things for me in my growth. One is seeing how I am one part of a bigger whole. I will not be able to do all the things, be all the people, fill all the need. So being able to recognize uniquely what is mine, I think that has
Mm.
been really big. I think owning my voice as a woman, a lot of my work over the last 8+ years at least in the church has been coming alongside women, helping to elevate the voices of women in our body. And so I've walked with a lot of women who have had a lot of doubts about themselves, who have felt they weren't there, they weren't good enough, they weren't worthy. And so speaking life into those places for other women has turned my fingers right back at myself. So that has also been really instrumental for me. Going back even further, this is part of my wiring, right? And so as I think about your listeners, there are places that we can identify gifts within children that they just come out this way
Mhm.
and they require nurturing and guidance. And also, this is there from the go. And so that is the case for me. I mean, my mom tells the story of me as a little toddler, just with my eyes just full of concern, asking why she was sad. What's wrong, mama? What can I do to help? That is just who I am. And so for a lot of this last 4 years, it has been about refining. And so I think about that for your listeners too. Like we have this raw material, we have these
Mhm.
lives that God has given us. And then there are ways He's asking us to hone those that they become kind of like tools in our hands in a way. We become craftspeople. And so just being a natural listener and caregiver to people does not mean I'm going to be a good counselor. And so a lot of that has been adapting these
Mhm.
natural skills God has given me for the work. And so I see that as true in all of the places that women are serving. And so that's exciting to me.
Mm.
Our skills, our gifts don't just stop at a certain point in time. They're continually being made and molded.
Because God has something for us in every season.
Exactly.
And I love what you said. That's been similar to my journey, that I've always been life coachy, so to speak. Like ever people would call me their life coach friend, but I
Right.
wasn't. I didn't have the methodology. I didn't have the actual skill set that I
Yes,
needed to be a real life coach, to be a real effective coach. And it's different than a conversation. And just like you said, you had the raw material, but you needed some tools to hone your craft to be a therapist
that's
who
right.
is an effective therapist. It's different than just being able to empathize with people or draw out conversation. I think that's an important thing for people to know too, that you may be wired a certain way, but your next steps are going to help you hone that into a more effective skill that you can use for the world.
That's exactly right.
Mhm.
And tell me more about what was happening in you as you were gaining those skills.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm going to be vulnerable because I don't know how to answer this question any other way. But one of the things that was happening for me is just recognizing the ways that my compassion at times has been effusing with other people's pain. Like this face that mirrors, it's
Mhm.
happening inside of me too,
Mhm.
that I
Sure.
can just go right there with someone. In a counselor, that isn't necessarily the most helpful thing to do. I mean, honestly, often it is to have a really loving distance, separation. So, some feedback I got early on was you take up so much room with your compassion in this space that there almost isn't enough room for the client. And that was really painful to
Mm.
hear because I'm like, oh, this is how I've been my whole life. Now I want to like rewind and go, shoot, like, why did I do that? That was too much. But it was part of me developing as a therapist is to be able to have enough distance that I'm not only feeling with, but I can put language to, and I can help make connections for a client that he or she isn't able to do for themselves. But if I'm right there with them every single step of the way, their journey is like I'm journeying with them, as opposed to having a sense of being with and also being slightly removed. So that's one example I can think of. It has been a real process for me. I'm also a big, yeah, yes, I just nod constantly. I'm like in it, in it, in it. And I've had to learn how to dial that back because it can convey agreement, for example, with something I don't agree with. And what I'm trying to say is, I'm with you. I'm tracking with you. But just hearing from the other side how something might be received. I mean, I would practice digging my fingernails into my hand every time I wanted to go, yeah, oh, or whatever. And I would be like, what's the feeling word? What's the feeling word? So, I mean, there's all kinds of like training that I've had to navigate, which has made me real awkward in social settings, I'm sure, because people are like, wait, she wanted to nod, but she stopped. But I'm starting to find like, okay, this is my counseling space. This is how I operate there. And this is how I get to continue to operate in the world.
Just can relate 100% because a lot of the same methodology is with coaching and it's so hard. But here's what I want to really call out in that is there is so much beauty and growth. In fact, people often think that happiness comes from certain things that actually don't provide happiness. But one of the things that does provide true happiness is when we're growing because it's that satisfaction that comes. And so even though it's hard, you're growing and that creates a sense of satisfaction in your life that is so good. And that's a part of what I also want to talk about here is in midlife, we don't just ride off into the sunset. We have to actually find ways to keep growing and developing as people so that we keep that satisfaction level and it gets to no, there is purpose beyond our roles. And now that's changing. And we have to find new purpose and new ways to grow and develop, just like we did back then.
That's right. Yes, it makes me think of Eric Erickson, for anyone who has studied psychology, the stages of development. Generativity versus stagnation is the primary work of middle age. So, am I going to stay where I am, trying to do things as I've always done them and begin to become stagnant? Or am I going to be a person who is continually connected to life, whether it's within myself, which of course it never stays just with ourselves, right? Or if it's for the benefit of others, what is the legacy we want to pass on? And so I do think that's why we begin to ask some of these deeper questions of identity and purpose, is because this stage of our life is showing us we're moving into a time where what we have gained, it's like very much what we've accumulated, whether it's possessions or it's our own growth, it's not going to stay with us forever. I mean, this needs to move on. Growth sustains more life. It doesn't just stay within one individual. So I think for me, I have loved the work I've done in ministry. And also I felt like part of the invitation to me was where might there be a next step to be able to sow into more lives. And so I think for your listeners, it may not be going back to school, but it might be one way that God is inviting them to partner with another person that will bring life. So I think just that picture of life continuing, because I think what the world tells us is that we're on our decline. And again, we see how untrue that is, actually. Some of the women I know who have the most life about them are women in this season of life, where their eyes are becoming opened to possibility and to what might be next and to who they want to bless. That is, I think, just that question is really an important one to ask. And that's not to say everything needs to happen at once either, because that can be a really overwhelming place. How do I make my mark? Yeah, just one movement, one question at a time.
And I want to recognize that a lot of women feel like their lives up till now maybe have had a lot of purpose. I hear people talk about from success to significance.
Mhm.
And maybe that's more of a traditional male career trajectory. But I think for a lot of women, I've had a lot of significance. Now I want some success. Like
Yeah.
I want to excel in ways using parts of me that maybe have been dormant or that I'm just discovering for the first time or I
Yes.
have not discovered yet. And so
Mhm.
that question of what is the next step feels tangible and also approachable. It doesn't feel so overwhelming. Like, what do I want to do with the rest of my life?
Yes.
But what do I want to do next? And what do I need to do to get there? Feels like a good first set of questions.
Yeah, and I would say that has been a big part of my own discernment and decision-making journey, is just asking one question at a time and holding it out before God and people who know me and love me. I think really helpful questions can also be things like, what is life draining to me and what is life giving to me in this time? And I think for a lot of us who've spent many years parenting children, we're used to kind of the reality that good things can also be incredibly draining things. It's not an either or. Also, we can fall into the pattern of thinking that if things aren't painful, if we don't feel the sacrifice in every moment, that maybe it isn't the place of real significance. And I
Hmm.
think that can be a temptation for us to move
Hmm.
into, if we're not long suffering, if this doesn't feel difficult and hard, then I'm doing something wrong. And
Hmm.
sometimes God has places of new joy and freedom for us. And so paying attention to that, too, at least as a possibility, can really be helpful for people.
Hmm.
That goes really deep because I think how people are raised influence that also. My husband and I were just having a conversation about that the other day. That are you raised to think that somehow if it's not easy, it's not good?
Yep.
Hmm.
Or the opposite. If it's easy, it's bad.
Hmm.
That we somehow think everything should have an obstacle or it's not worth doing. Or if there's any obstacles, it means we're not supposed to be there.
Exactly.
So, really trying to weigh, no, what is true, what is wise, how do we discern how to move forward? And sometimes it's hard and sometimes it's easy, and both are okay paths. How do you walk people through some of that discernment? If there's someone who's really wanting to discern their way forward and they don't know how, what would be a way that they could do that?
So I've learned from a lot of people in my life who are trained spiritual directors. I see a spiritual director myself. That work of discernment, it's complex. I think on one hand, and on another, it doesn't need to be complicated. So some of these things that we're already talking about, like the place of story where you have experienced being met by God, what he might be inviting you into now. Is there a word or a phrase that just keeps coming back to you again and again? It can be these little moments. And so I've become a huge fan of just writing simple things down. I used to be like long form journaler, feel like it had to be something that I would, I don't know, maybe publish or something in order for it to be worth the process. And so now just to remind myself, God speaks in these themes over time. There's something about writing them that makes them tangible. So I'm in the process of launching a soul care ministry at our church, which is part of my process of leaving church staff, staying at our church, but also having these mechanisms in place where we can better care for one another. So we have been we went through a process of 8 months of discernment where we were sharing with one another what we were hearing God say. We were saying, these are needs we see. These are potential places I can imagine meeting those needs, taking time to pray together, asking God to give us a picture. So I think there's some great resources that I could maybe share with you that might be good for your listeners. But I think that doing this in community, to me, that has just become like kind of my drum that I am beating in this season of life. We are not meant to do this alone. And we've been sold a faulty bag of goods or whatever that phrase is, if we believe that we are supposed to have within us what we need to make these big life decisions. So things like quiet, silence and solitude, sitting with a word. I'm a big fan of carrying tangible things with me, like a rock in my pocket, or there are things called clinging crosses that look like this that I often will hold or have near me just to remind me that God is with me in these moments. And it helps me to notice what is already
Mhm.
happening. I think taking walks where I don't have my phone with me and I'm open to listening and letting creation show me what God might want to show me through creation. A lot of it is very unglamorous and very slow
Mhm.
and very countercultural. That said, I would also say that if listeners are in a place where they don't know what they're good at, they don't have any idea maybe about some of these things. I think of the Strengths Finder that I did with you all 10 years, 11 years ago now, and how significant that was for me at that time of my life to say, oh, these things that seem kind of rando and accidental, they actually fit together. Wow. The
Mhm.
Big Five is another one that people will use. You can just Google Big Five. There's different ways to take those tests, but those can help people to understand a little bit more about their wiring, which may give them questions as starting points that they can hold out before God and before their people.
Mhm.
And the idea of doing this in community is partly because the Holy Spirit speaks to us in different ways, and we
Yeah.
want to be sure that the voice we are hearing is not just our own hopes or limitations,
Right.
but to hear confirmation from other people who are also praying through a question or praying through
Mhm.
something together. So it's not just an element of you don't want to do it because you don't want to be lonely. It's that the discernment process is about hearing the Holy Spirit together. The Holy Spirit should be saying the same thing essentially in the same direction, moving people in the same direction. It may not be exactly the same words or the same way, but if we trust that something is from God, other people will also be hearing that it is from God.
Yes, absolutely right. And the idea too that you can be walking with friends who are holding different questions. It's not
Mhm.
just about like, there are times for listening and people coming around and I'm considering this and I want people in my circle who can speak into this, but it might just be something as simple as what are you wondering about right now in your life? What are you curious about? What idea do you keep coming back to? Is that something we can pray about together? So you can each be holding different questions,
Mhm.
even in the same space together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's great, Ashley. Well, as we're wrapping up today, what would be your final charge for women who are considering going back to school or who want to discern their next step?
Yeah. The thing that keeps coming back to me is the inherent worth and value in each woman, in each person who's listening. I think it all begins with that we have a loving God who formed and made us with purpose and intention and specificity. And so, as we are talking about the beauty of communal life, we are also seen as individuals and we have a part to play, as you were both saying. So, I think that starting place is really key. I will say another piece that has been very significant for me and might not be to the same degree for everyone, but I do feel like I need to mention it is, for those of us who are really drawn to people helping work, which in some ways, really most work is people helping in some form or fashion. To come from a place of knowing that we are loved, I knew for a long time that my purpose was to love people. The Bible tells us this, but also I felt it very specifically that I was here to love, but I had a really difficult time receiving love. And so it was probably 2 years where every morning I would lay on the couch under my blanket and just say, Lord, I receive your love for me. I would just
Mhm.
put my hand on my heart. I would touch a place in my body that was hurting and just receive love to that place.
Mhm.
When we receive, we are open to give. And when we're holding on to our own resources tightly, we
Mm.
just don't have the same flow to be able to pass on to others. So I would really encourage women to explore God's love for them that then propels them to move in ways that love God and love other people.
What a powerful place to end, Ashley. I'm going to do that. I'm going to lay on the couch, put my hand over my heart, and just receive God's love. I love it. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.